Pokemon, a series that is near and dear to many weeaboos, and Mewtwo, a Pokemon that has been one of my very favorites since I first laid eyes on him in the original game and then of course the movie. I've said it a million times that I love Mewtwo, and thus I will continue to buy stuff of him, so today let's review something very familiar. Today's figure is Nendoroid 875, Sakaki and Mewtwo. Sakaki is of course the Japanese name for Giovanni, and Mewtwo is of course the Pokemon Mewtwo. Which of course canonically, Giovanni has been one of the only people to ever tame Mewtwo. So with that said, let's take a look here and see what this set has to offer. Somehow there's not terribly many figures of Sakaki, or Giovanni, whatever you'd like to call him, and thus I thought this was an interesting set, mainly because we get two Nendoroids essentially for the price of one. The box is a plain black, of course, with some of the typical good smile and Pokemon branding on there, and of course a picture of the two of them on the front with this windowed display. One of the sides shows Mewtwo charging a Shadow Ball, and then beneath that, launching a Shadow Ball, while Giovanni stands idly by. On top, we see Giovanni wielding a Pokeball in his classic look, while Mewtwo is charging up a Psychic Attack in the back. The other side shows a very cool-looking Mewtwo standing ready to battle, while Giovanni stands with a smirk on the side. Then beneath it, we get a shadowy Giovanni, which is of course how he was shown in some of his original sprites. The back has taken a couple of those poses and put them together with tons of text all over the bottom. And then of course on the bottom is actually a different shot, which is just the Giovanni with the shadowy face. Though I do appreciate them putting something different on the bottom, even if it is recycled. But now that we've looked at the box long enough, let's open this thing. Funny enough, we get to see Mewtwo without his tail here because it's not included in this blister, but we do get a separate bag that is pretty hefty, which includes, I'm assuming, the rest of the pieces. Okay, and here they are right out of the packaging. And while there's not much to talk about accessory-wise, I will say that on their own, these figures already are pretty bold, and they stand out pretty nicely. They don't really seem like the typical Nendoroids, and I think that's for good reason, because you are getting two of them. So while they do seem a bit strange, I assure you this is for the best. I actually like the Mewtwo because it's a pretty darn good looking figure of him. It's a bit cuter, but I do like it. Giovanni is not quite like your typical Nendoroid. Comparing him to any other Nendoroid is kind of weird because I guess he has better proportions. His arms seem longer and his legs also do as well. He certainly looks a heck of a lot more adult than some of the other figures that I've seen from the line. Now of course, some of the other figures that I do have from the Nendoroid line are intended to look younger, so maybe that's the reason why, but still, I do enjoy this. But with those initial impressions out of the way, let's see how their posability is. Starting with Giovanni first, I don't think we should be too surprised by the fact that he has very typical Nendoroid articulation. His arms can go up and down because they're on simple peg joints. There's really not much to talk about here. This is very standard for many of the Nendoroids, and I'm not too upset about it being this case with him. His head, of course, is on one of those ball peg joints that we know and love, so it can go up and down, it can swivel side to side, and it can even roll around pretty decently. He does have a waist joint, which is another peg, so you do get a tiny bit of articulation out of that, but it's really not too much because his blazer sort of prohibits that. But as you can see, his pelvis is separated from his legs in a very particular way. The ball peg joints are of course a matching black, so it doesn't look too terrible, but I will say it is a little gappy. Either way, of course, we're getting better articulation out of his legs because of course with that joint there, you can swivel them as well as make them go up and down, and that gives you a lot more articulation with his legs. And that's pretty much all there is to say. He doesn't have too much else going on. He does come with a couple additional arms that are bent, and that is where you will kind of get his articulation, I guess you could say. It's not quite the same, but it does sort of take the place of having proper joints for the elbows. The bent arms in question, of course, are actually him with his hands in his pockets, which surprisingly doesn't look too bad. And Giovanni's no different from the many other Nendoroids in the series where you can take off his hair and actually remove his face so that you can change his expression. But one thing I do rather like is that his hairline here is a separate physical piece. It's not as if this is atypical for a Nendoroid, because with many of the female characters or characters with larger hairstyles, this is typical, but something like this I could see another brand just sort of painting onto his forehead. And speaking of that noggin, of course, he does come with additional faces. Rather than the chibi face that he comes with, this one is a bit more serious and honestly kind of creepy. And any longtime Pokemon fan will be able to recognize this striking similarity to his in-game counterpart. Another thing that you may or may not have noticed is that he is wearing the newer Rainbow Rocket insignia on his jacket, which is terrible, and we are not going to keep that because we have the option to change it. You can actually just plug this little insignia off. It's just in there with an attached peg, and then we can swap it out for the classic logo. The classic, of course, being the signature red R for a rocket. And in addition to his other arms, this one here has a hand with a peg on it so that you can actually attach his little Pokeball. This is one of those little touches that without it, I would feel like this figure was somewhat incomplete, but I'm very thankful that this was included. Now, in addition to his Pokeball, there is one additional piece that I have that maybe not many others do. You see, if you pre-ordered him from the Pokemon Center, you would actually get a pre-order bonus. And that little bonus was in the form of a Beast Ball. I'm not quite familiar with this. This might be from the anime, I guess, but let's open it up. So I'm an idiot, and I just took a look at this, and the Beast Ball is actually, yes, a newer Pokeball that is a better success rate for catching Ultra Beast Pokemon. I don't think Mewtwo's an Ultra Beast, but he is a bit strong, so maybe that applies. I actually specifically hunted down one that came with the pre-order bonus because I wanted to include it with the review. There's another pre-order bonus that you could have got as well, where it's a different base for him to stand on, where it's just the Rainbow Rocket logo, but I personally think an additional Pokeball is cool. But still, I don't think this is better than the actual Pokeball. That other one's just too iconic. This one really isn't that recognizable. But still, I appreciate a bonus piece. Now then, let's take a look at our boy Mewtwo here. Mewtwo, of course, comes with his own Nendoroid base as well, which is much appreciated because I guess he would be pretty hard to stand on his own. He's a pretty solid weight. I'm surprised at just how well constructed he is. One thing I like is that he actually has the little tube going from the back of his head to his back itself. Normally, I would say with an Nendoroid, you can leave out certain details and you would probably be just fine, and this would be one of those, but I appreciate this is a different type of plastic. It's much more rubbery, meaning it is far more flexible, which allows it to keep a lot of the immersion there. Now, of course, like I said, you did have to plug in Mewtwo's tail, and it is just a simple peg, so that's kind of annoying because it can really only be swiveled and it really doesn't have much posability. But as for the rest of the figure, the posability is pretty damn good, mainly because he consists of a couple ball joints here. There's a ball joint at the head, which is not a ball peg joint, so like you saw before, that thing is rotating and twisting and going up and down at every angle you'd like. Now his arms are on the typical ball peg joints, meaning they can only go in and out, and of course be swiveled around if they need to as well. It still has a pretty good range of motion though, despite that. Now his legs, of course, are also on ball joints, meaning they can rotate all kinds of ways, which I really do appreciate. And finally, there is a ball joint that connects his waist to his chest, meaning that can be rotated and moved around in all sorts of creative ways. It really doesn't go up and down very much, but you can rotate this thing pretty much however you want because it is on a ball joint right there, so that's really appreciated. His hands are just a simple peg joint, which is fine because that's kind of how all the Nendoroids are, so they can really only be swiveled a bit. Now, like Giovanni, he also comes with bent elbow arms as well. This is helpful because where his lack of articulation comes in, this will allow him to hold different poses. But other than that, the only other thing, of course, is his psychic attack, which could be considered, I guess, a psychic blast or even a shadow ball. It's a pretty neat little clear piece of purple plastic. It's got a bit of swirl design on there. It's kind of hard to pick up because it's pretty dark. Thankfully, there's just a small little peg hole there, which you actually plug one of these guys into. And these things are pretty par for the course with Nendoroid. Wherever you want to have a floating accessory, you just use one of these, and it has a couple different arms where it can bend different ways, and it doesn't break the immersion too much, because this just plugs right into the base. And now he can do a psychic attack. As you can see here, they stack up just a little bit taller than the Umaru Nendoroid, but of course, like I said, Giovanni is an adult. Measured from his base to his head, Giovanni comes in just a little over 3.5 inches, whereas Mewtwo comes in just a bit over 4. Umaru here doesn't even hit the 3 mark, so I gotta say, I'm liking how much I'm getting for the money I spent here. All in all, I like these two as a pair quite a bit. Giovanni looks menacing and cool, just the way that we remember him, and Mewtwo just looks like a complete badass. Though they may seem small and cute and chibi because they're Nendoroids, these two still command quite a bit of respect just due to the way that they come off. They have quite a bit of an attitude to them, which I really do enjoy. This captures the character behind these two really well. And of course, that's an incredibly important thing for figures. Again, they are Nendoroids, so they're a bit more simple, so we don't want to sit here and hammer the point home that they don't have crazy articulation. For what they are pretty well articulated, and I do enjoy the way that you can pose them. Seeing these two together is awesome, even though I pretty much just bought the set for a chibi sort of Mewtwo Nendoroid. I just wanted to see that. I didn't even know that existed. But with all that in mind, I do rather like them. The accessories are pretty darn cool, and they do just as much as I would want them to do, so I'm really not too upset with this pair. Overall, I'll give the set of Sakaki and Mewtwo a solid 8 out of 10. I feel like there could be one last thing that really brings this home, which is common with these Nendoroid kits, but either way, I'm still pretty satisfied with the way that they come off. What do you think though? Do you like Mewtwo? Do you like Sakaki or Giovanni? What did you think of this set? Was that pre-order bonus worth paying a little bit extra? I'm going to link 2 videos on screen for you to check out that I did recently. Make sure to click them because it does help the channel even if you've seen them. And make sure to subscribe to the channel because I'm making videos every single week. With all that said, thank you so much for watching, have an amazing weekend, and keep on collecting.